The night was supposed to be a celebration. The ballroom glittered with golden chandeliers, the polished marble floors reflecting the champagne glasses clinking in the hands of New York's elite. Everyone was dressed in their finest gowns and tuxedos, gathered to honor the success of Grant Financial, the empire built by the powerful CEO, Alexander Grant. At his side stood his wife, Olivia Bennet, 30 years old, glowing yet exhausted, her hand gently resting on her small but noticeable baby bump. She had come tonight despite her pregnancy, determined to stand by her husband, believing this evening would mark the proud future of their growing family. But destiny had prepared a cruel twist. When Alexander took the stage, cameras flashing, applause filling the air, Olivia smiled with quiet pride. She thought he would thank her, his loyal wife, the woman carrying his child. Instead, he reached out. Not for her hand, but for another woman's. The room gasped as Alexander pulled a stunning brunette onto the stage. Madison Clark, his young and ambitious PR manager, smiled like a queen ascending her throne. "This woman," Alexander announced boldly, his voice booming, "is the reason behind my company's latest triumph. She is the partner I choose to stand beside me, not only in business, but in life." The applause froze. A murmur swept across the room like a chilling wind. Olivia's smile shattered. Her heart pounded, each beat louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the whispers of betrayal echoing around her. She clutched her belly instinctively, as if shielding the life within from the humiliation burning her soul. Madison leaned into Alexander, her manicured hand sliding onto his chest. Olivia's vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but her throat locked. She could only stand there, trembling, her face drained of color, while the crowd stared, judging, whispering. "Isn't that his wife?" One woman whispered loudly enough for Olivia to hear. "She's pregnant, my God!" Another replied, shaking her head. Tears welled, but Olivia refused to let them fall in front of these people. With all the strength she had left, she forced herself to turn away, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked out of the ballroom. Each step felt like knives piercing her chest. Behind her, Alexander didn't call her name. He didn't even glance her way. His arm stayed wrapped tightly around Madison. Outside, the city lights blurred through her tears. Her breath came in short gasps as she tried to steady herself against the cold night air. The glamorous facade of her life had collapsed in a single moment. She wasn't just betrayed, she was erased, discarded like she was nothing. Olivia pressed her hand against her belly. "I won't let him destroy us," she whispered shakily. Her voice broke, but determination flickered in her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, something stronger than pain began to grow. Because in that very moment, Olivia decided she would disappear from Alexander's world forever. And when he came looking, he would never find her. Olivia Bennet had never imagined her life would turn into a tabloid headline. To the outside world, she was the elegant wife of Alexander Grant, the most talked-about CEO on Wall Street. But behind closed doors, she was still the same girl who grew up in a small Ohio town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Olivia learned early the value of sacrifice, humility, and holding on to dignity, even when the world tried to take it away. At 30 years old, she wasn't a socialite or a woman hungry for the spotlight. She was an interior designer, passionate about creating warm, meaningful spaces where families could feel safe. Her work wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every chair she picked, every color palette she created told a story about belonging. That's all she ever wanted. A family of her own, a home filled with love, not just expensive furniture and designer walls. When she first met Alexander, he seemed like the answer to every silent prayer. He was older, confident, successful. He swept her into a whirlwind romance filled with roses, rooftop dinners, and promises whispered under the New York skyline. For a girl who had spent her life struggling, his attention felt like a miracle. He told her she was his muse, his reason to believe in love again. She trusted him completely, even when friends warned her that a man like Alexander loved power more than people. For the first few years of their marriage, Olivia fought hard to be the perfect wife. She learned how to stand tall at charity galas, how to smile for photographers, how to hide the exhaustion when gossip columnists picked apart her outfits. Still, she clung to the dream that their marriage was more than appearances. And when she found out she was pregnant, she thought it was the turning point. The moment Alexander would soften, the moment they would finally build the family she longed for. But pregnancy wasn't easy. There were nights of nausea, mornings of dizziness, and quiet afternoons when she sat alone in their penthouse, her husband too busy at work. He rarely asked how she was feeling. Instead, he drowned himself in meetings, mergers, and late-night calls that left her wondering if business was the only thing keeping him away. Olivia told herself it was temporary, that Alexander would come around once he held their child. She painted the nursery herself, filling it with soft yellows and delicate stars on the ceiling. Every brushstroke was a prayer for a happy future. She even kept a little journal, writing letters to her unborn baby about the life they would share, the bedtime stories, the laughter, the simple joys she never had as a child. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she sensed something was wrong. His eyes no longer lit up when he looked at her. His touch grew colder. She told herself not to overthink, but the fear lingered. That fear became reality the night Alexander chose another woman in front of the world. And as Olivia walked away from that ballroom, she knew her battle had only just begun. The world Alexander built was made of glass, steel, and shimmering lights. From the outside, it looked untouchable. Their penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side stretched across the top of a tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city that never slept. Every night, the skyline glowed like a promise, but for Olivia, it felt more like a cage. The penthouse was filled with luxury most people only dreamed of. Italian marble counters, imported chandeliers, a walk-in closet larger than the apartment she once shared with her mother. Every detail screamed wealth, success, and status. Guests who visited often gasped at the view, whispering how lucky Olivia must be. But behind the glossy surfaces, loneliness echoed louder than any praise. Alexander thrived in this environment. His world was one of endless boardrooms, private jets, and gala invitations. At Grant Financial's headquarters in Wall Street, he was revered as a visionary. Employees scrambled at the sound of his voice, terrified of disappointing him. Madison Clark, the young PR manager, understood how to maneuver in that space. She played her role perfectly, laughing at his jokes, aligning herself with his ambitions, presenting herself as the woman who got his hunger for power. Olivia, on the other hand, felt like a shadow moving through those glossy halls. She had once accompanied him to the office, carrying homemade lunches just to spend an hour together. He brushed her off with polite smiles, too busy to even eat what she made. In the conference rooms, she sat quietly, ignored, while Madison's laughter filled the air. It was in those moments that Olivia realized she didn't belong in Alexander's world. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because he had stopped wanting her there. At home, the luxury mocked her. She could wander through 10 rooms and still feel alone. The nursery she painted with her own hands was the only place that carried warmth. In the rest of the penthouse, the silence was suffocating. She often sat by the window, staring down at the bustling streets, envying the people who walked freely, holding coffee cups and laughing with friends. They seemed more alive than she ever felt in her golden cage. The truth was, Alexander loved appearances more than people. He loved the way photographers followed them into black tie events, the way magazines wrote about his perfect life. Olivia was part of that image, until she wasn't. Once Madison entered the picture, Olivia became invisible in her own home. The night of the gala wasn't just a public humiliation. It was a brutal reminder that she had been replaced long before the announcement. Madison was already taking her place in Alexander's world. The penthouse that was once Olivia's refuge now felt like a stranger's house. Every polished surface reminded her that she was disposable. Olivia looked around at the cold perfection of her surroundings and made a quiet vow. She would not raise her child in a palace built on betrayal. She would leave this glittering prison behind, even if it meant starting over with nothing. Because sometimes freedom is worth more than all the diamonds in Manhattan. Alexander Grant was not always the man who humiliated his wife in front of hundreds. Once, he had been charming, persuasive, the kind of man who could convince anyone that the impossible was within reach. That was how he built his empire, through confidence, ambition, and a ruthless refusal to accept failure. But as the years went on, That drive hardened into arrogance. Alexander stopped seeing people as human beings and started seeing them as tools, stepping stones toward greater power. With Olivia, it began subtly. At first, he encouraged her dreams, listening as she spoke about her design projects, even visiting one of her completed apartments. But as his own empire grew, he stopped pretending. He called her work small compared to his billion-dollar deals. He told her to leave the business world to men like him. To the outside world, he was a doting husband, but behind closed doors, his words sliced deeper than any knife. Into this void stepped Madison Clark. She was young, beautiful, and above all, ambitious. Unlike Olivia, she didn't talk about homes filled with warmth or the beauty of a hand-painted nursery. Madison talked about power, media coverage, brand positioning. She understood Alexander's hunger and fed it like fire. Every compliment she gave him was calculated, every smile rehearsed, every touch designed to convince him that she was the partner he truly deserved. Madison was clever enough never to openly disrespect Olivia, at least not at first. She played innocent, claiming she only wanted to support Alexander's vision, but behind Olivia's back, she worked tirelessly to erase her. She made sure Alexander's schedule was packed so he would miss doctor's appointments. She whispered doubts into his ear, suggesting that Olivia didn't fit the image of a CEO's wife, and slowly Alexander began to believe her. He started coming home later and later, the scent of expensive perfume lingering on his suits. He dismissed Olivia's questions with irritation, telling her she was paranoid, hormonal, imagining things. He made her doubt her own instincts. That was his power, not just to betray, but to make her feel like she was the problem. By the time the gala arrived, Alexander was no longer the man Olivia married. He had become someone else entirely. A man so consumed by ego that he could stand in front of a room full of witnesses and discard his pregnant wife like an unwanted accessory. Madison didn't need to say a word. She stood there, radiant and triumphant, letting Alexander do the dirty work for her. To him, Olivia had become invisible. To Madison, Olivia was already defeated. But both underestimated one thing. Beneath Olivia's quiet demeanor was a strength neither of them had ever imagined. Because the woman they thought they had destroyed was about to write a new chapter of her life. One where Alexander's arrogance and Madison's manipulation would finally come crashing down. And when the empire they built on betrayal began to crumble, Olivia would be the one standing tall. The gala should have been Olivia's proudest moment. She had dressed with care, choosing a flowing midnight blue gown that skimmed over her growing belly. She hoped Alexander would glance at her and remember the love they once shared, the life they were about to bring into the world. Instead, she became the centerpiece of his betrayal. When Alexander pulled Madison onto the stage, Olivia froze. The applause was uneven, awkward, filled with the uncomfortable shuffling of people unsure if they should clap. Cameras flashed, capturing Madison's triumphant smile and Alexander's confident grip on her hand. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. Her ears buzzed, drowning out the music, the chatter, the laughter. All she heard was the shattering of her own heart. Around her, whispers spread like wildfire. "Isn't his wife right there?" one woman whispered, eyes darting toward Olivia. "She's pregnant," another hissed, covering her mouth in shock. Men shook their heads. Women exchanged pitying glances. Olivia wanted the ground to open and swallow her whole. She turned slowly, her movements deliberate, as though one wrong step would make her collapse. Her hand instinctively cradled her belly, shielding her child from the cruelty of the world. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply walked out, each step echoing against the marble floor, heavy with shame. Behind her, Alexander never called her name. Madison never flinched. The betrayal was complete. Outside, the cold New York night wrapped around her like a punishment. Olivia clutched her small purse, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to cry where strangers could see. She staggered to the curb, heels wobbling, as the city light smeared into golden streaks through her tears. She hailed a cab with a trembling hand. The driver glanced at her pale face and asked gently, "You okay, miss?" She nodded quickly, forcing her voice steady. "Brooklyn," she whispered. That was all. In the back seat, the silence finally broke her. Tears spilled freely, soaking her dress. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the city rush past. Every billboard, every skyscraper reminded her of the man who had just destroyed her. She thought of the nursery she had painted with such care, of the journal filled with letters to her unborn baby. She had dreamed of telling her child about a strong father who would protect them both. Now, that dream lay shattered. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, whispering to the life inside her. "I'll protect you. I don't know how yet, but I will. You deserve better than this." Her voice cracked, but determination flickered through her despair. The cab stopped in front of a modest apartment building in Brooklyn, far from the glittering towers of Manhattan. Olivia paid the driver with shaking hands and stepped out into the night. The gown that once made her feel beautiful now clung damp and heavy with tears. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being invisible. And from the ashes of this humiliation, a new Olivia was about to rise. The first nights in Brooklyn were the hardest. Olivia traded marble floors and city views for peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew seeping through the cracks of a tiny rented apartment. The place was small, one bedroom with a creaky bed and a single lamp that flickered whenever she turned it on. It was the opposite of the glamorous penthouse she had just left behind. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something close to control, though it was buried under layers of fear and loneliness. She kept the curtains closed, afraid someone might recognize her. Alexander's world was everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, TV screens and deli shops blaring about his latest business deal. She avoided them all. She didn't want to see his face, didn't want to hear his name. The silence pressed down on her. Nights were the worst. She would sit on the edge of the bed, hands cradling her belly, whispering to her unborn child because there was no one else to listen. "It's just us now," she murmured. Her voice shook. "I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I promise I'll try." Food lost its taste. She picked at simple meals, toast, canned soup, tea gone cold, forcing herself to eat because the baby needed her to. She skipped her prenatal vitamins more than once, too overwhelmed to keep track. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked like a stranger. Pale skin, red-rimmed eyes, hair unbrushed. She used to glow at galas, her smile polished and perfect. Now she was just another tired woman trying to hold herself together in a city that didn't care. The weight of betrayal pressed on her chest, heavier than the growing baby inside. She replayed that night at the gala over and over until it haunted her dreams. Madison's triumphant smile. Alexander's hand gripping another woman while she stood forgotten. The humiliation burned so deeply it left her trembling whenever she thought about it. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Anger. It came quietly at first, like a whisper. She remembered the years she had given Alexander, the sacrifices she made, the love she poured into a man who tossed her aside. She remembered the nursery she painted, the journal she filled with promises. And she realized he had taken so much, but he hadn't taken everything. She still had her child. One evening, Olivia forced herself to open the journal again. Her hands shook as she wrote, but the words poured out like medicine. "You are the reason I will keep fighting. No matter what he did to us, we are not broken. We will rise again." It wasn't strength yet, not fully, but it was a start. In the shadows of that small apartment, Olivia was collapsing piece by piece. Yet in the cracks of her despair, the first seeds of resilience were quietly taking root. And soon, fate would send someone into her life who would change everything. On her third week in Brooklyn, Olivia forced herself out of the apartment for a doctor's appointment. She had avoided it for too long, afraid of being recognized, but the baby's health could not wait. Pulling on a loose sweater and tying her hair back into a messy bun, she hoped she looked like just another tired woman in the city. The waiting room buzzed with quiet conversations, mothers flipping through magazines, children squirming in their seats. Olivia sat hunched in the corner, her hands folded over her stomach, praying no one would notice her. When the receptionist called her name, she stood quickly, keeping her eyes low as she followed into the hallway. That was when she heard a familiar voice. "Olivia? Olivia Bennett?" Her heart lurched. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just a few feet away was Daniel Hayes. It had been years since she'd last seen him, back when he was just a determined law student with big dreams of defending the vulnerable. Now he wore a tailored suit, his presence confident but warm, his eyes widening with recognition and shock. For a moment, Olivia considered denying it, pretending she wasn't who he thought she was. But Daniel stepped closer, concern softening his features. "It really is you. My God, it's been so long." She forced a small smile, but her voice cracked. "Daniel? Didn't expect to see you here." "I'm consulting on a patient's legal case," he explained quickly. Then his gaze dropped to her belly and his expression shifted. Surprise, then worry. "Olivia, you're pregnant." Her throat tightened. Shame flooded her, as though she had to explain why she was standing there alone, hiding in a small clinic when her husband was one of the most powerful men in New York. She tried to brush it off. "It's complicated." Daniel didn't press. He simply said, "Then let's sit down. Tell me what happened." And for the first time since that humiliating night, Olivia allowed herself to speak. The words tumbled out, shaky at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She told him about Alexander, the gala, Madison, the cold silence of the penthouse, the lonely apartment in Brooklyn. Tears welled, but Daniel didn't look at her with pity. He listened, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching at the betrayal she described. When she finished, silence hung between them. Then Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "You are not alone anymore. Do you hear me? Whatever he did, whatever he took from you, you're not going to face this by yourself." Olivia's breath caught. For weeks she had lived in shadows, convinced she had no one left. Now, sitting across from an old friend who had grown into a man of principle, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: relief. It wasn't love. It wasn't rescue. But it was a hand reaching into the darkness, pulling her back from the edge. And Olivia didn't know it yet. But Daniel's return was only the first step toward a powerful transformation that would shake Alexander's world. While Olivia was trying to rebuild her strength in silence, Alexander Grant was busy showcasing his new life with Madison Clark. Their photographs filled society columns. The powerful CEO and his dazzling companion, smiling at charity galas, arriving arm in arm at exclusive restaurants. To the world, it looked like Alexander had upgraded, but beneath the glossy surface of his empire, cracks had already begun to form. Madison had what Alexander craved: youth, beauty, and a sharp understanding of image. But what she truly hungered for was control. She played her role carefully, whispering strategies that flattered his ego while quietly weaving herself deeper into his business. "The press adores us," she would purr, scrolling through glowing headlines. "Together, we look unstoppable." But Madison's loyalty was never to Alexander. It was to herself. Every calculated smile was designed to position her as indispensable, the woman behind the throne. When Alexander dismissed his long-trusted advisors because Madison claimed they were out of touch, she celebrated, in silence. The fewer loyalists around him, the easier he was to manipulate. Alexander, blinded by vanity, didn't notice how dangerous her influence had become. He pushed for riskier deals, chasing headlines instead of stability. He ignored warning signs from the board, silencing anyone who questioned him. The empire he had built on discipline and calculation was now running on reckless ambition. Behind the closed doors of their penthouse, Madison's sweetness sometimes cracked. She would grow cold, demanding more attention, more gifts, more proof of her worth. Alexander, terrified of losing the image he had flaunted to the world, bent to her demands. He had chosen her publicly. He couldn't back down without looking weak. But his employees weren't blind. Whispers began to circulate in the office. "He's distracted," some muttered. "She's pulling the strings," others said. Productivity dropped. Deals started falling apart. Rival companies saw an opening, circling like sharks around the wounded empire. Alexander told himself he was still in control. He strutted through the halls, barking orders, ignoring the sideways glances, but deep down he felt it, the unease of a man standing on quicksand. His arrogance had cost him the loyalty of his wife, the respect of his staff, and soon it would cost him much more. Meanwhile, Madison began meetings secretly with investors, presenting herself as the true visionary of Grant Financial. She spoke softly, always smiling, but her message was clear. Alexander was losing his edge, and she was the future. The trap was being set, and Alexander was walking right into it. For Olivia, tucked away in Brooklyn, this shift in power remained invisible. For now. But fate had a way of weaving stories together. The empire that had humiliated her was beginning to tremble, and soon the cracks in Alexander's kingdom would collide with the new strength growing inside her. Because the higher Alexander climbed with Madison by his side, the harder his fall would be when the truth finally came crashing down. Life in Brooklyn was nothing like the glossy world Olivia had once inhabited. Gone were the private drivers, the designer gowns, and the penthouse view of Central Park. In their place were squeaky subway rides, second-hand clothes, and nights spent counting the dollars in her wallet to make sure she had enough for groceries. It was humbling, terrifying, and strangely liberating all at once. Each morning, she forced herself out of bed, even when the weight of exhaustion pressed heavily on her body. The pregnancy made everything harder. Simple tasks, climbing the stairs, carrying bags, even tying her shoes, felt like battles. But Olivia pushed through, reminding herself with every movement that she wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. She was fighting for the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. She found part-time work at a small neighborhood furniture store. The pay was meager, but the owner, a kind elderly man named Mr. Rosen, gave her flexible hours and never asked questions she didn't want to answer. "You've got an eye for design," he said one afternoon, watching her rearrange a display of lamps and chairs. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words lit a small spark inside her. For so long, Alexander had dismissed her passion, belittling her career. But here, in this modest little shop, she was reminded that her skills mattered. Customers often lingered over her arrangements, complimenting her taste. It wasn't much, but it was something. A thread of identity she could cling to as she pieced together the ruins of her life. Still, the nights were heavy. Loneliness crept into her apartment like a shadow. She would curl up on the worn couch, her hands on her belly, whispering to the baby. "We're going to be okay," she said softly. Some nights she believed it. Other nights, her voice cracked with doubt. Daniel checked in often. He brought groceries when he could, reminded her about appointments, and gently urged her to take legal action against Alexander. But Olivia wasn't ready for that yet. Her wounds were still raw. The thought of facing Alexander in a courtroom made her chest tighten with fear. And then, one rainy afternoon, a moment came that changed something inside her. She was rearranging a window display at the store when a young couple stopped to watch. They smiled, admiring her work. The woman turned to her and said, "This looks beautiful. Do you design interiors professionally?" Olivia froze. It had been months since anyone asked her that. Slowly she nodded. "Yes, I used to." "Well," the woman said warmly, "you shouldn't stop. You clearly have a gift." Those simple words sank deep into Olivia's heart. For the first time since the night of the gala, she felt a flicker of confidence, fragile but real. Maybe she wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe her story wasn't over. She stepped back from the display, her reflection faint in the glass, her belly visible beneath her sweater. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she and her baby were not just surviving, but thriving. And Olivia had no idea that her fragile new strength was about to collide with a destiny far greater than she ever imagined. Nights in Brooklyn had a way of pulling Olivia backward. The quiet was too heavy, too sharp, leaving her alone with memories she wished she could bury. She would sit on the edge of her narrow bed, the hum of traffic outside her window, and close her eyes. And every time, the past came rushing back. She remembered the first time she met Alexander. It was at an art gallery in Soho, a place she had gone with a client who wanted her advice on a loft renovation. Alexander had been magnetic from the moment she saw him. Tall, impeccably dressed, his confidence filling the room like an electric current. When their eyes met, he smiled in a way that made her feel like the only woman in the world. He pursued her relentlessly. Expensive dinners, spontaneous weekend trips, bouquets of roses so large they barely fit through the door of her tiny apartment. For Olivia, who had grown up watching her mother sacrifice everything just to pay the bills, it felt like stepping into a dream. She had never been spoiled before. She had never been adored like that. She told herself it was love. For a while, it was. There were nights when Alexander held her close, whispering promises about the future. There were mornings when he surprised her with coffee just the way she liked it, when they laughed over burnt pancakes in their first shared kitchen. She wanted to believe those moments were real, that pass. But as the years went on, the tenderness faded. The roses stopped arriving. The laughter at breakfast turned into silence at separate ends of the table. When she spoke about her design projects, he barely looked up from his phone. His empire consumed him, and Olivia became background noise. She tried harder, new recipes, new dresses, new ways to keep his attention. But nothing worked. Slowly, she began to feel invisible. When she discovered she was pregnant, her heart leapt with hope. She thought this would change everything, that Alexander would remember the man he used to be. She imagined him holding their child, imagined late nights where they would take turns rocking the baby to sleep. She believed this baby would heal the distance between them. But Alexander's eyes never lit up when she told him the news. He offered a thin smile, a distracted, "That's good," before returning to his emails. From that moment, she carried the weight of joy and disappointment at once. She told herself it was just stress, that once the baby arrived, things would be different. Now, sitting in her modest apartment, those memories pierced her like glass. The man who once promised her forever had humiliated her in front of the world. The dream she clung to had turned into a nightmare. Olivia pressed her hands against her belly, whispering through tears, "I thought love was enough. I was wrong." But what she didn't know yet was that her story wasn't about the love she lost. It was about the new strength she was about to discover. While Olivia struggled quietly in Brooklyn, Alexander Grant's kingdom began to tremble. On the surface, he was still the powerful CEO striding through glass towers, but behind the closed doors of Grant Financial, the whispers were growing louder. Deals that once came easily now stalled. Investors questioned his judgment. Rival companies circled like predators sensing blood. Alexander brushed it all off as jealousy. "They envy me," he told Madison with a smug grin as they lounged in the penthouse. But Madison wasn't smiling. She had grown restless. For months, she had played the perfect partner, smiling for cameras, whispering strategies, making him believe he was untouchable. But now, the cracks in his empire were too obvious to ignore. She began to pull away. Where she once clung to his arm, she now checked her phone during their dinners. Where she once praised his brilliance, she now sighed impatiently, reminding him of the risks he had ignored. "You should have listened to me," she snapped one night after another deal collapsed. "You're slipping, Alexander. People are laughing at you." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Alexander thrived on respect, on fear, on the illusion of control. The thought of anyone laughing at him was unbearable. But instead of admitting his mistakes, he grew harsher, barking orders at his staff, firing loyal executives, and replacing them with people too weak to challenge him. And Madison noticed. She began attending secret dinners with investors, sliding into conversations where she painted herself as the future. "Alexander has vision," she would say sweetly, "but vision means nothing without strategy. That's where I come in." Her eyes sparkled, her charm undeniable. Slowly, those investors began listening to her more than to him. Meanwhile, the media began sniffing around. Rumors of reckless decisions and financial missteps leaked into tabloids. Once hailed as a genius, Alexander was now painted as unstable, impulsive, blinded by his obsession with his mistress. He slammed newspapers on his desk, furious, but no matter how hard he tried, the narrative slipped from his control. At home, the tension thickened. Madison no longer pretended to be the adoring partner. She wanted more money, more influence, more recognition. When Alexander tried to remind her of her place, she laughed coldly. "Your place is disappearing, Alexander. Without me, you're finished." For the first time, fear gnawed at him. He had built his empire on arrogance, convinced he could never fall. But Madison was not Olivia. She would not stand silently by his side. She was ambitious, ruthless, and she smelled weakness. Alexander poured another glass of scotch, staring out at the glittering skyline that once felt like his kingdom. The city hadn't changed, but he had. He was no longer the man in control. He was a man unraveling, and Madison was tightening the strings. And while Alexander tried desperately to hold his empire together, he had no idea that Olivia, the wife he discarded, was slowly finding her strength, ready to rise from the shadows he left her in. Daniel Hayes had always trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him Alexander Grant's empire was built on more than just ambition. Every time Olivia described Alexander's behavior, the arrogance, the secrecy, the late-night calls, Daniel felt there was more beneath the surface. And now, as a lawyer who specialized in protecting the vulnerable, he had the skills to dig. He didn't tell Olivia at first. She was still fragile, balancing her pregnancy with the daily struggle of survival. But Daniel knew that if Alexander truly was as reckless as he suspected, the truth could become Olivia's shield. So he began quietly making calls, pulling favors from old contacts on Wall Street, scanning through public filings late into the night. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. On paper, Grant Financial looked polished, but Daniel noticed unusual patterns. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and transactions timed suspiciously close to Alexander's public announcements. To most people, it was noise. But to Daniel, it screamed manipulation. The breakthrough came when an old college friend, now working as an analyst, slipped him a confidential report. "I probably shouldn't be showing you this," the man whispered over coffee. "But your gut is right. Grant's been inflating numbers, hiding losses, and funneling money through fake subsidiaries. If this goes public, he's finished." Daniel's pulse quickened as he studied the report. This wasn't just a mistake. It was fraud. If exposed, Alexander wouldn't just lose his empire. He could face prison. But the evidence was more than financial wrongdoing. Hidden within the files were documents tying Madison to the schemes. She wasn't just his mistress, she was his partner in crime. Her carefully crafted image as a supportive advisor was nothing but a disguise for her hunger for power. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. He now held the key to Alexander's destruction. But it wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Olivia had been discarded, humiliated, erased from her own life. This evidence could restore her dignity and protect the future of her child. The question was timing. If he revealed it too soon, Alexander might bury it with his influence. If he waited too long, Madison might tighten her grip and escape unscathed. Daniel needed to be careful. That night, he visited Olivia's apartment. She was sitting on the couch, rubbing her belly, her face tired but calm. He didn't show her the files yet. Instead, he simply said, "Olivia, I need you to trust me. I've found something that could change everything for you and your baby." Her eyes widened with both fear and hope. "Change everything how?" Daniel hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Let's just say, Alexander isn't as untouchable as he wants the world to believe." For the first time, Olivia saw a glimmer of justice ahead. The man who had broken her might finally face the consequences of his cruelty. And though she didn't know it yet, the golden evidence Daniel held would soon turn Alexander's empire into ashes. For weeks, Olivia had lived as if she were invisible, hiding in the shadows, shrinking from the world, too broken to imagine a future. But the night Daniel spoke to her about Alexander's corruption, something shifted deep inside her. For the first time since the betrayal, she realized she wasn't powerless. She had something Alexander never expected her to find: the truth. The next morning, she stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bathroom. Her reflection startled her. Pale skin, tired eyes, messy hair. She barely recognized the woman staring back. For months, she had seen weakness, but now she saw possibility. She touched her belly gently, whispering, "We deserve better, and I'm going to make sure we get it." Olivia began rebuilding herself piece by piece. She started with small changes, brushing her hair every morning, putting on clean clothes that made her feel more like herself, keeping a journal of her goals. She forced herself to eat properly, to take her vitamins, to walk around the block even when exhaustion threatened to keep her in bed. Each step, however small, was an act of defiance against the despair that had consumed her. Daniel became her ally in more ways than one. He pushed her not just legally, but emotionally. "You are stronger than you think," he reminded her often. "Don't let him write the end of your story." His words sank into her like seeds, slowly blooming into courage. Olivia also returned to her craft. At the furniture store, she offered design advice to customers, sketching layouts on scraps of paper. One couple was so impressed they hired her to decorate their small apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but when she finished the project and saw the joy in their faces, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in months: pride. She was still capable. She was still talented. She was more than the wife Alexander had discarded. Day by day, the victim in her began to fade, replaced by a woman with fire in her eyes. She no longer avoided mirrors. She no longer whispered apologies to her unborn child. Instead, she made promises. I will show you that your mother didn't give up. I will show you what strength looks like. Then came the decision. Daniel laid the evidence on her kitchen table, page after page of corruption, fraud, and betrayal. Olivia studied it carefully, her hands trembling, not from fear but from determination. She realized this was her chance, not just to free herself from Alexander's shadow, but to stand tall before the world that had watched her humiliation. She looked at Daniel, her voice firm. I want to fight, not just for me, for my baby, for the woman he thought he could destroy. For the first time since the night of the gala, Olivia's back was straight, her chin lifted, her eyes alive with fire. She was no longer the discarded wife. She was a fighter preparing for battle. And Alexander had no idea that the woman he erased was coming back stronger than ever. The boardroom of Grant Financial was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above Wall Street. On that morning, executives gathered around the massive mahogany table, whispering nervously as Alexander stormed in, his jaw tight, his suit immaculate. He was furious. Rumors about his failing deals had leaked again, and investors were demanding answers. He slammed a folder on the table. We're not here to panic, he barked. We're here to remind the world who controls this market. But before he could launch into his speech, the doors opened. Every head turned. Silence fell. Olivia Bennett stepped inside. She no longer looked like the fragile woman who had fled the gala weeks earlier. Her hair was styled neatly, her clothes sharp but modest, her posture straight. She carried herself with calm strength, one hand resting lightly on her belly. Her eyes locked on Alexander's, steady and unflinching. For the first time in years, Alexander was speechless. Olivia, he muttered, his voice low, as if saying her name might break the spell. The executives looked at one another in confusion. Madison, seated near Alexander, stiffened in her chair. She hadn't expected this. Her painted smile faltered as Olivia walked forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. I'm not here to cause a scene, Olivia said evenly, her voice carrying across the room. I'm here because I have something to say, and I suggest you all listen. She set a folder on the table, Daniel's evidence, neatly compiled. The room shifted with murmurs as the executives glanced at one another. Alexander's face drained of color. What is this? He demanded. The truth, Olivia replied. The truth about your offshore accounts. The truth about your fraudulent reports. The truth about the empire you built on lies. She looked around the room, her voice steady. And the truth about how you discarded your wife and unborn child while you paraded your mistress in public. Gasps filled the air. Madison tried to interrupt, but Olivia turned her gaze on her, sharp as glass. You've played your part well, Madison. But the board deserves to know how deeply you're tied to his corruption. You weren't just his partner in public, you were his partner in crime. Madison's face flushed red, her mask slipping. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Some began flipping through the documents Olivia had laid out, their eyes widening as they scanned the damning evidence. Alexander's fists clenched. You think you can walk in here and... Yes, Olivia cut him off firmly. I can. Because you underestimated me. You thought I would disappear. You thought humiliation would silence me. But you forgot who I am. She placed her hand on her belly. I am a mother now, and I will not let my child's legacy be defined by your lies. The silence that followed was deafening. For once, Alexander had no words. And in that moment, every person in that room realized Olivia Bennett was no longer the broken wife. She was the storm that could bring Alexander Grant to his knees. The boardroom erupted. Paper shuffled, voices rose, and the tension was electric as executives pored over the evidence Olivia had placed before them. Alexander's face turned crimson. His carefully constructed image of control was slipping with every passing second. This is nonsense, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Fabricated lies meant to discredit me. She's bitter. She'll say anything. His eyes burned into Olivia's, but she didn't flinch. Really? Olivia's voice was calm, steady. She pointed to a page in the documents. These wire transfers were made to shell companies that don't exist. They trace back to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Your signature is on the authorization line. Explain that, Alexander." The room fell silent. All eyes shifted to him. Madison shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For weeks she had been maneuvering behind the scenes, but now the spotlight was too hot. She licked her lips, her confidence wavering. An executive turned to her. "Miss Clark, your name appears here as well. Care to clarify your role in these transactions?" The mask finally cracked. Madison straightened, her tone icy. "I did what I was told. Every move I made was at Alexander's direction. If there was fraud, it was his, not mine." Alexander's head whipped toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. "You liar," he hissed. But Madison didn't stop. She leaned forward, addressing the board with a perfect blend of indignation and self-preservation. "I warned him. I told him these tactics were reckless. He refused to listen. I only followed orders because I was pressured. I have nothing to hide." The betrayal sliced through Alexander like a blade. His mistress, the woman he had humiliated his wife for, was abandoning him in front of his empire. He tried to regain control, but the room was already turning against him. One board member cleared his throat. "If this evidence holds, we could face federal investigation. Shareholders will demand answers. We cannot allow the company to collapse with him at the helm." Another executive nodded grimly. "It may be time to consider removal." Alexander's voice rose, desperate now. "You fools think you can run this without me? I built this empire. None of you would be here without me." Olivia stood tall, her voice cutting through his rage. "You built it on lies, Alexander, and lies always collapse." The boardroom doors opened suddenly, and reporters' voices echoed down the hall. Word had already spread. Someone had leaked the documents. Cameras flashed outside, journalists shouting Alexander's name. Panic rippled through the room. Madison gathered her purse calmly, her smile sharp. "Good luck explaining yourself," she whispered to Alexander before sweeping out the door, leaving him alone with the wreckage. Alexander sank into his chair, his face pale. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the predator. He was the prey. And as the empire he once ruled began to crumble, Olivia walked out with her head high, no longer the woman he broke, but the woman who broke him. The fallout was immediate. By the time Alexander left the boardroom, the media storm was in full swing. Reporters swarmed the building, microphones thrust in his face, cameras flashing like lightning. "Mr. Grant, is it true you falsified financial records? Did you pressure Madison Clark into participating in fraud? Where is your wife?" Alexander shoved past them, rage boiling under his skin. He stormed into his penthouse hours later, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. The man who once strutted with untouchable confidence now looked like a predator cornered. Madison was waiting, glass of wine in hand, lounging on the velvet sofa as if nothing had changed. "You embarrassed me," Alexander growled, slamming the door shut. "You threw me under the bus in front of the board." Madison's smile was cool, detached. "I saved myself. You were sinking, Alexander, and I refused to go down with you." His jaw clenched. "After everything I gave you, after I risked everything for you?" Madison stood slowly, setting her glass on the table. "Let's be honest, you didn't risk anything for me. You used me. I used you. That's how this works. But now the game has changed and you're not the winner anymore." He stepped closer, fury in his eyes. "You think you can survive this without me?" Her laugh was sharp, mocking. "I don't just think it, I know it. The investors are already speaking to me. They see me as the future. You're finished." The words landed like daggers. Alexander's empire, his reputation, his pride, it was all slipping away, and the woman he had chosen over his wife was now driving the final nail into his coffin. He reached for her arm, but Madison yanked it back, her eyes flashing with disdain. "Don't ever touch me again," she snapped. "You're desperate, and it's pathetic." "I wanted power, Alexander, not a broken man scrambling to hold on to what's left of his crown." With that, she grabbed her coat and her designer bag, striding toward the door. Alexander's voice cracked as he shouted after her. "Madison, you can't walk away from me." But she didn't even glance back. The door slammed shut, the echo reverberating through the empty penthouse. For the first time, silence terrified him. He looked around at the lavish apartment, the marble counters, the gold accents, the endless view of Manhattan. None of it mattered anymore. He had wealth, but no respect, power, but no allies, a kingdom, but no queen. The irony twisted like a knife. He had destroyed Olivia, the woman who had loved him without condition, only to be abandoned by Madison, the woman who loved nothing but ambition. Alexander sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Everything he once controlled was slipping through his fingers. And as Madison vanished from his life for good, Alexander was left with the bitter truth. He had lost everything, and the woman he once discarded was the only one still standing. It was late at night when the first sharp pain hit Olivia. She had been sitting at her small kitchen table, sketching designs for a client's apartment, when her hand suddenly froze around her pencil. A wave of pain surged through her body, so strong she nearly doubled over. She clutched the edge of the table, breathing heavily, her heart racing. The contractions came faster than she expected. Panic flickered in her chest. She wasn't ready, not mentally, not emotionally. She staggered to the phone and dialed Daniel's number with trembling fingers. "Daniel," she gasped, her voice breaking. "It's happening. The baby. Please, I need help." Within minutes, Daniel was at her door, his face pale but determined. He wrapped an arm around her, steadying her as another contraction tore through her. "I've got you, Olivia. You're not doing this alone." The cab ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and fear. Olivia gripped Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Sweat poured down her face, tears mixing with whispered pleas. "Please let my baby be safe," she repeated over and over as if the universe might hear her. At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a delivery room. Bright lights, beeping machines, voices calling out instructions, it all spun together in a haze. Olivia lay back, exhausted, her body racked with waves of agony. She felt small, fragile, overwhelmed. But every time her strength wavered, Daniel was there. He stood by her side, holding her hand, whispering steady words into her ear. "Breathe, Olivia. You're stronger than this pain. You're stronger than him. Look at me. You can do this." His voice anchored her. She thought of Alexander for a fleeting moment, how he had once promised to be there, how he had abandoned her long before this night. But then she looked at Daniel, steady and unwavering, and realized she was no longer defined by abandonment. Hours dragged on. Each contraction was a battle, each push a war cry. Olivia screamed, cried, begged for it to end, but she kept going, driven by the fierce love for the life inside her. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cry of a newborn filled the room. The sound broke her. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed the tiny baby in her arms, a girl. Small, perfect, pink, her cries fierce and alive. Olivia's chest heaved as she stared down at her daughter, overwhelmed with relief and awe. "She's beautiful," Daniel whispered, his own eyes glistening. Olivia held the baby close, her heart swelling with love she didn't know she still had the capacity for. "You're safe now," she whispered through her tears. "I promise, I'll never let anyone hurt you." For the first time since her world had collapsed, Olivia felt whole again. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, all of it faded in the presence of this fragile miracle. And as she cradled her daughter, Olivia realized that this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one, brighter than she ever imagined. While Olivia held her newborn daughter in the quiet of a Brooklyn hospital room, another scene unfolded across Manhattan, a scene Alexander Grant could no longer control. The evidence Daniel uncovered had reached the press, and overnight, headlines screamed with scandal. Grant financial fraud exposed, CEO Alexander Grant under investigation, Mistress tied to embezzlement scheme. The same cameras that once adored Alexander now stalked him with ruthless hunger. Reporters camped outside his penthouse, demanding answers. Former allies vanished, their silence louder than any accusation. Investors pulled out, stocks plummeted, and the once proud empire cracked under the weight of truth. Alexander stormed into his office, barking orders, but his authority was gone. His executives avoided his gaze. Some had already resigned. Others whispered in corners, waiting for the inevitable. When federal agents walked through the lobby with subpoenas in hand, the building itself seemed to exhale, as though relieved his reign of fear was ending. Madison, of course, was nowhere to be found. She had already leaked carefully worded statements to the press, painting herself as a victim, a woman misled by a ruthless man. Her betrayal was complete, her hands washed clean in public, leaving Alexander to bear the full weight of the scandal. At a hastily arranged press conference, Alexander attempted to salvage his image. He stood before flashing cameras, his voice shaky as he denied every accusation. "I am innocent. These are lies spread by bitter enemies and a vindictive ex-wife." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Reporters shouted over one another, waving copies of leaked documents. One voice rose above the chaos. "Mr. Grant, is it true your mistress has testified against you?" The question struck like a bullet. Alexander froze, his composure shattering. Cameras captured every twitch, every beat of sweat, every flicker of fear. That image, once powerful CEO reduced to a desperate man, spread across every screen in America. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from Olivia's hospital room, the baby sleeping soundly in her arms. He turned down the volume on the TV and smiled softly. "It's happening, Olivia. Justice is finally here." Olivia looked at the screen briefly, her heart steady. Once, the sight of Alexander would have torn her apart. But now, holding her daughter, she felt nothing but closure. He was no longer her world. He was just a man undone by his own greed. Within weeks, federal charges were filed. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Alexander's bail was set at an astronomical figure, and even then, no one came to his aid. His assets were frozen, his penthouse seized, his reputation destroyed. For years, he had believed he was untouchable. But in the end, he was brought down not by competitors or rivals, but by the woman he underestimated most. And as Alexander faced the collapse of everything he'd built, Olivia stepped quietly into her new life, free at last from his shadow. The weeks after her daughter's birth were both exhausting and beautiful. Olivia's small apartment echoed with midnight cries, soft lullabies, and the steady rhythm of survival. Sleep was scarce, meals were rushed, but every time she looked at her baby's tiny face, she felt a warmth that made the sacrifices worth it. For the first time in months, her tears were not of pain but of gratitude. She named her daughter Grace, a name that carried both strength and serenity. "You're my Grace," she whispered often, holding the baby close. "You saved me." Daniel remained by her side, helping where he could, bringing groceries, making sure Olivia never missed a doctor's appointment. But one evening, he introduced her to someone new. "Olivia," Daniel said gently, "there's someone I'd like you to meet. He can help you, not just legally, but in building a future." Olivia hesitated. She wasn't ready for strangers, not after everything she had endured. But when Ethan Reynolds walked into the room, something about his presence felt different. Ethan was not flashy like Alexander. Though he was a billionaire in the tech world, his demeanor was calm, grounded. His eyes carried a quiet kindness, the kind born from someone who had known both success and heartbreak. He greeted Olivia with a warm handshake, his gaze respectful, never lingering on her scars or her vulnerability. "I've heard a lot about you," he said softly, "and about the courage it took to stand up for yourself." Olivia felt a flicker of discomfort. She wasn't used to being praised anymore. But Ethan's words didn't feel patronizing. They felt genuine. Over the next few weeks, Ethan visited often. At first, it was under the guise of business. He admired Olivia's eye for design and offered her small projects to test her skills. "My office needs warmth," he admitted with a chuckle. "Technology doesn't make a place feel like home. People like you do." Olivia was cautious, but when she worked, she felt alive again. Sketching, choosing colors, arranging spaces. It reminded her of who she was before Alexander tried to erase her. Ethan paid her fairly, respected her opinions, and encouraged her to trust her instincts again. But it wasn't just business. Ethan took time to talk with her, to listen. He asked about Grace, about her childhood, about her dreams beyond survival. He never pushed, never demanded. Instead, he gave her space to heal at her own pace. One afternoon, as Olivia watched Ethan gently cradle Grace in his arms, she felt an unfamiliar sensation: hope. For so long, men in her life had been sources of pain or disappointment. But here was someone different, someone who valued her not for appearances, not for what she could give him, but for who she was. Olivia wasn't ready to call it love. Not yet. But she was ready to admit something she never thought possible. Her heart was no longer broken beyond repair. And with Grace in her arms and Ethan by her side, Olivia realized that healing wasn't just about surviving. It was about opening herself to happiness again. Months passed, and Olivia's life slowly transformed. The woman who once hid in a cramped apartment, broken and humiliated, was no longer there. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. With Grace in her arms and a small but growing design business supported by Ethan, she had rebuilt herself from the ashes. Ethan's presence became more than professional. He was patient, never rushing her, never demanding more than she could give. He helped her laugh again, reminded her that love didn't have to be painful or manipulative. Where Alexander once belittled her dreams, Ethan encouraged them. Where Alexander abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment, Ethan showed up without hesitation, whether it was late-night feedings, business advice, or quiet evenings spent watching Grace sleep. One evening, standing on the terrace of Ethan's home overlooking the Hudson River, Olivia felt a sense of peace she had never known. Ethan wrapped a gentle arm around her shoulders. "You've come so far," he said softly. "You should be proud." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You did it because you're stronger than you ever believed. I just reminded you of it." Their eyes met, and for the first time since her marriage collapsed, Olivia didn't look away. She let the warmth of his gaze settle into her, and she knew she was ready. Ready for love that was real, steady, and safe. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander Grant faced a very different fate. His trial dominated headlines. Federal prosecutors tore through the evidence, and one by one his former allies turned against him. Madison testified in court, cool and composed, painting Alexander as the mastermind while she posed as the manipulated pawn. The jury didn't believe his desperate denials. The once mighty CEO was sentenced to years in prison. His penthouse was sold, his company dismantled, his name synonymous with disgrace. Reporters captured him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and regret. But there was no one left to defend him. No allies, no mistress, no wife. He had destroyed them all, and now he was utterly alone. Olivia never attended the trial. She didn't need to. Watching his downfall wasn't her victory. It was simply justice taking its course. Her victory was holding Grace close, living each day free of his shadow, and finally stepping into a future that belonged to her. On Grace's first birthday, Ethan threw a small gathering at his home. Close friends, laughter, warmth. It was everything Olivia once thought she'd never have. As she watched Ethan lift Grace into the air, the little girl squealing with delight, Olivia's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of joy. Ethan caught her gaze and smiled. "You both are my family now," he said. And in that moment Olivia knew the truth. She had lost everything once, but in the end she gained far more, a daughter who gave her purpose, and a partner who gave her love. Her story wasn't one of defeat. It was one of rising, of healing, of proving that no betrayal could stop a woman who chose to fight for her own happiness. So my friends, that's how the story closes. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a special way. Olivia's pain, her strength, her healing, it's more than just drama, it's a reminder for all of us. Life can break you, but as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Olivia turned betrayal into growth, loss into strength, and found a future brighter than her past. Maybe you faced your own heartbreaks or setbacks. Remember, they don't define you. You define what comes next. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need hope. Like it if it stirred your emotions. And don't forget to subscribe to join us in more journeys of healing and resilience. Together, we'll keep finding the light in even the darkest stories. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. In the middle of a dimly lit funeral parlor, a coffin rested at the center of the room. Candles flickered against the walls, their weak flames dancing like they were mocking the life that was about to be buried alive. Inside that coffin was Sophia, a young woman carrying her husband's child. She was not dead. She was breathing. She was terrified, and she was trapped. Her hands scratched desperately against the wooden lid, her fingernails breaking as she tried to claw her way out. Her muffled cries for help were swallowed by the soundproof walls. No one would hear her. No one was supposed to. Standing just a few feet away was her husband, David. His expression was cold, detached, like this was just another business transaction. By his side stood Monica, his lover, smirking as though she had already won the prize. The two of them looked down at the coffin like it was a problem they had finally solved. "This is the only way," David whispered, his voice low but steady. "Once she's gone, everything will be ours." Monica leaned closer, her hand sliding down his arm. "She was weak, David. She was nothing but a burden. With her out of the picture, we can live the life we deserve." Inside the coffin, Sophia's body trembled as tears streamed down her face. The baby inside her belly kicked, as if fighting for its own survival. She tried to scream, but her voice cracked, too faint to break through the thick wood above her. She could hear faint footsteps circling, the sound of her husband's shoes tapping against the polished floor. He was walking away. He was leaving her there to die. The betrayal cut deeper than the coffin's walls ever could. This was the man she had loved, the man she had given everything to. She had sacrificed her youth, her dreams, her body for his child, and now, because of another woman, he had chosen to bury her alive. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. Darkness began to press in around her, suffocating her lungs with every shallow breath. She thought of her mother's face, of the life she had once dreamed of the nursery she had been preparing for her baby. None of it mattered now. She was going to die, alone, abandoned, unloved. But fate has a cruel way of twisting even the darkest of moments. Just as Sophia felt her strength slipping away, just as she thought her final breath would escape her lips, something shifted. The coffin creaked. Air leaked in through a tiny crack. A faint sound, almost too small to believe, reached her ears. It was the sound of a key turning. Someone else was in the room. Someone was about to open the coffin. But was this a savior or another enemy waiting to finish what David started? Before the night of betrayal, before the coffin and the suffocating darkness, Sophia's life had looked very different. She was 27, a quiet and hardworking woman who never asked for much. She had grown up in a modest home, the daughter of a school teacher and a factory worker. From a young age, she learned the value of sacrifice. Her mother taught her patience, her father taught her resilience, and together, they molded a daughter who carried kindness in her heart and strength in her spirit. Sophia never dreamed of wealth or luxury. All she wanted was love, a family of her own, and a husband who would cherish her. When she met David, she believed she had found that dream. He was charming, ambitious, and spoke words that made her believe in forever. Against her parents' cautious warnings, she chose him. She thought she was stepping into a future filled with security and devotion. At first, married life was simple but happy. She worked as an office assistant, spending her evenings cooking meals and waiting for David to come home. She smiled when he complimented her cooking, blushed when he kissed her forehead, and believed his promises when he said he was working late for their future. When she discovered she was pregnant, her joy overflowed. She imagined tiny footsteps echoing in their hallway, bedtime stories whispered in the dark, and laughter filling their small apartment. But slowly cracks began to form. David grew distant. His eyes no longer lit up when he looked at her. He stopped asking about her day, stopped holding her hand in public, stopped noticing the way her belly grew with their child. The late nights at work became excuses. The whispered phone calls in the bathroom became secrets. Sophia felt the shift in her bones, but she refused to believe it. She convinced herself he was simply stressed, that once the baby arrived, he would return to her, to them. She endured the loneliness quietly. She smiled at neighbors who congratulated her on the pregnancy, hiding the ache in her chest. She folded baby clothes late into the night, her tears dripping onto the tiny fabric. Every kick from inside her belly reminded her she had to stay strong, not for herself, but for the child who depended on her. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She noticed perfume on his shirt that wasn't hers. She smelled the faint trace of wine on his lips when he claimed he had been working overtime. One night, when he turned away from her in bed, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered to her unborn baby, "It's okay. Even if no one else stays, I'll never leave you." Her words were a promise she intended to keep. Yet fate had already begun its cruel game. The love she clung to was a mask, and behind it was betrayal darker than she could imagine. And soon Sophia would discover that the man she trusted with her life was preparing to take it away. Sophia's world before the tragedy was painted in two contrasting shades: the small, ordinary life she built with her own hands, and the larger, glittering life David constantly chased. Their apartment was modest, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where children played on sidewalks and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. The walls were thin, the paint faded, but to Sophia, it was home. She decorated it with hand-stitched curtains, small family photos, and a baby crib she saved months to buy. Each corner carried her touch, her effort, her quiet dream of building a warm nest for her family. Yet David rarely noticed those details. His mind was elsewhere, absorbed by the corporate world, where appearances mattered more than loyalty. He worked in a prestigious investment firm, surrounded by expensive suits, glittering offices, and colleagues who measured success by the cars they drove and the vacations they flaunted online. Whenever David returned home, his briefcase still smelled of cigar smoke and imported cologne, a stark contrast to the simple scent of soup Sophia had kept warm on the stove. Sophia spent her mornings walking to the nearby market, her hands cradling her growing belly while she greeted vendors who offered her fresh vegetables and kind words. The market women always asked, "How many months now, Sophia?" She would smile softly and reply, "Almost 7," her voice laced with pride and anticipation. She held on to those moments because they were the only reminders that life could still be gentle, even when her heart felt lonely. In the evenings, when David wasn't home, Sophia would sit by the crib, running her fingers across the smooth wooden bars. She imagined holding her baby there, singing lullabies her mother once sang to her. She dreamed of the baby's first laugh, the first step, the first word. But her joy was always clouded by the emptiness of the chair across the table, the silence of meals eaten alone. The main stage of her story, however, was not only that small apartment, it was also David's world, the towering skyscraper where he worked late nights, the luxurious restaurants where he dined without her, the hidden places where Monica's perfume lingered on his skin. Sophia never stepped into those glamorous spaces, yet their presence haunted her home. She felt them in the distance, as though the life David wanted was pulling him further away, leaving her trapped in a bubble of sacrifice he no longer valued. The contrast grew sharper with each passing day. Sophia's world was filled with soft blankets, lullabies, and the smell of fresh bread. David's world was filled with ambition, temptation, and betrayal waiting to unfold. Two worlds that once promised to merge into one family now stood on opposite sides, colliding silently in the background of Sophia's fragile happiness. And in the middle of it all, in the space between her love and his lies, a storm was quietly forming, one that would soon shatter the fragile home she had worked so hard to protect. Sophia had no idea that her safe little apartment was about to become the doorway to her darkest nightmare. David was 32, polished on the outside, but hollow on the inside. To the world, he was the perfect image of a successful man, sharp suits, confident smiles, and an aura of ambition that made people trust him too quickly. But behind closed doors, David was consumed by greed, vanity, and a restless hunger for more wealth, more status, more attention. The simple joys of family life that once made him smile no longer mattered. He wanted a life that sparkled, and if that meant destroying the woman who had once trusted him with everything, so be it. At the center of his downfall stood Monica. She was 29, strikingly beautiful, with eyes that could charm and a voice that dripped with calculated sweetness. But her beauty hid a venomous nature. Monica had grown up learning to survive by using people, mastering the art of manipulation to climb higher and higher. When she met David at a company event, she saw not a man, but an opportunity. She read his weaknesses the way others read a book, his ego, his dissatisfaction, his craving for validation, and she exploited every one of them. Monica knew exactly what David wanted to hear. She told him he deserved better, that his wife Sophia was plain, ordinary, and unworthy of standing beside a man with his potential. She whispered dreams of luxury, of freedom, of a glamorous life where they could rule together without the burden of responsibility. David, intoxicated by her attention, let her words sink into his bones until he believed them. The more time he spent with Monica, the colder he became toward Sophia. He no longer saw the gentle woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to support him. Instead, he saw a shadow, a chain holding him back from the life Monica promised. His resentment grew, fueled by Monica's poisonous encouragement, until it twisted into something far more dangerous than neglect. Together, David and Monica formed a toxic alliance. She fed his ego, he gave her access to the wealth and lifestyle she craved. But it wasn't enough for them to be together in secret. Monica wanted Sophia gone completely. Her ambition was ruthless. She didn't just want David's love. She wanted his name, his fortune, his entire life. And David, blinded by lust and greed, was willing to hand it to her. Their whispers in dark corners turned into plans. Their late-night meetings became strategies. Slowly, they shaped a scheme so cruel that even the devil might have shuddered. To rid themselves of Sophia and her unborn child, they decided on a method that was as shocking as it was final. Not a divorce, not abandonment, death. What made their betrayal even more chilling was how easily they justified it. To them, Sophia was expendable, a woman too meek to fight back, too naive to suspect the danger closing in around her. In their eyes, she was already gone, nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of their glittering fantasy. And, with every secret meeting, every stolen kiss, they tightened the noose around Sophia's life, until only one terrifying plan remained. The poison in Monica's words did not strike David all at once. It was a slow infection, creeping through his mind day by day, until her voice became louder than his own conscience. At first, he resisted. Divorce was an option, he said. He could simply leave Sophia. But Monica's eyes narrowed, her lips curving into that dangerous smile he both feared and adored. "Divorce?" she whispered, brushing her hand against his chest. "Do you know what that would cost you? Half your assets, your reputation, the sympathy she'll earn as a pregnant victim." "No, David. Divorce makes her stronger. We can't give her that." David frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. Monica leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous murmur. "You need to think bigger. You need to think final. If she's gone, truly gone, no one will question you, no one will know, and everything, your freedom, your wealth, your life with me, will finally belong to us." It was the first time the word death settled between them, and David shuddered. He wasn't a killer. He told himself that. But Monica's grip on his weakness was unrelenting. She painted Sophia not as a wife, not as a mother-to-be, but as a burden chaining him to mediocrity. "She'll ruin you, David," Monica hissed one night. "If you let her live, she'll drag you down until you're nothing. Is that what you want?" Her words echoed like a curse. Soon, David began to see Sophia not as his partner, but as his enemy. Every time she smiled softly at him, every time she spoke of their unborn child, it only deepened his resentment. Monica was the fire in his veins, pushing him forward, urging him to do the unthinkable. And then came her plan, so twisted it sounded almost impossible. Monica suggested they stage Sophia's death, as if it were fate itself. Not a murder in plain sight, not an accident too easily questioned, but something theatrical, unforgettable, and irreversible. "A coffin," she said one evening, her eyes gleaming under the restaurant lights. "Imagine it. She's inside, no one suspects a thing. People will believe she passed away suddenly. A weak heart, stress from pregnancy, it's believable. By the time anyone realizes the truth, it will be too late. She'll be gone, and we'll be free." David sat back in shock, his glass of wine trembling in his hand. The image was grotesque, unthinkable. And yet, the more he imagined it, the more it twisted into something that made sense. No messy investigation, no suspicion, just a silent, suffocating end that left him and Monica untouched. Monica pressed her hand over his and whispered, "You're not killing her, you're saving yourself." It was the final nail in Sophia's coffin, planned not by fate, but by the two people she trusted least. The scheme was set in motion. All they needed was the right night, the right place, and the right excuse to lure Sophia into her own grave. And while Sophia prepared for motherhood, they were preparing her funeral. Darkness. That was the first thing Sophia felt when her eyes fluttered open. Not the soft darkness of night, but a crushing, suffocating black that pressed against her from every side. She tried to sit up, but her forehead slammed into something hard and unyielding. Panic shot through her veins. Her hands stretched upward and met wood, smooth, cold, and terrifyingly close. She was in a box. At first, her mind refused to accept it. Maybe it was a nightmare, some twisted dream born out of exhaustion. But the stale air that scraped her lungs, the overwhelming stillness, the scent of varnished wood. It was real. She was trapped inside a coffin. Her heart pounded so violently it hurt. She pressed her palms against the lid, pushing with all the strength she could summon. Nothing moved. She screamed, her voice hoarse, muffled by the wood surrounding her. No one answered. The sound of her own desperation bounced back at her, swallowed by the silence. Sweat poured down her face as she clawed at the lid, her fingernails splintering, blood smearing across the smooth surface. She could feel the baby inside her kicking, reacting to her terror. Tears burned her eyes. "Please," she sobbed into the darkness, her voice cracking. "Somebody help me! My baby, please!" But there was no one, only her own cries echoing back, a cruel reminder of her helplessness. As minutes dragged into an eternity, her breaths grew shallow. Every gasp felt like fire tearing through her lungs. The coffin seemed to shrink, pressing tighter and tighter, squeezing the life out of her. She thought of her mother, of the nursery she had prepared, of the future that had once seemed so bright. Was this how it would end? Buried alive, abandoned, with her child never given the chance to see the world? Her mind spiraled between terror and denial. How could David do this to her? The man she had loved, the father of her child, the one she had trusted with every part of herself. How could he leave her here to die? She wanted to hate him, but her heart was too broken even for hatred. All she could feel was the raw ache of betrayal. Her body grew weaker, her limbs heavy, her chest burning for air. The silence around her was absolute, crushing her spirit as much as her body. For a moment she closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, whispering a silent goodbye to her baby. Then, creak, her eyes shot open, a faint shift. A sliver of air kissed her cheek. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The lid moved. Someone was on the other side. Hope surged through her veins, clashing violently with fear. Was it rescue? Or was it David, returning to make sure she never escaped? She pressed her trembling hands upward, whispering with the last of her strength, "Please, save me." And as the lid began to rise, Sophia's fate hung in the balance, caught between salvation and the final strike of betrayal. The lid groaned as it shifted, and for a terrifying second, Sophia thought her mind was playing tricks on her. She blinked through the blur of tears, her chest heaving with shallow, desperate breaths. Then a stream of cool air brushed against her face. It was real. The coffin was opening. Light stabbed her eyes, faint but enough to make her squint after the suffocating darkness. A shadow hovered above her, the outline of a man. His hands gripped the wooden lid, pulling it open with effort. Sophia flinched, terrified it might be David, returning to watch her die. But then she heard a voice, deep, urgent, trembling with something that sounded like fear and pity. "Stay still, I've got you." Her body went limp with shock. It wasn't David. This voice carried no cruelty, no coldness. Hands reached for her, strong yet careful, sliding beneath her trembling arms to lift her out. Sophia's weak body collapsed against his chest, her sobs muffled by the stranger's shirt. The scent of cologne mixed with sweat filled her senses, and for the first time that night, she felt a flicker of safety. The man carried her swiftly through a back corridor of the funeral parlor, away from the room of death that had nearly become her grave. Sophia struggled to find her voice. Who are you?" she whispered, her lips trembling. He glanced down at her, his jaw tight. "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you're alive. We can't stay here." Her mind spun. Alive. The word echoed inside her like a fragile miracle. She had been moments away from suffocation, moments away from losing not just her life but her baby's. Yet here she was, held in the arms of a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. Every step he took echoed in the empty hallway, a haunting reminder of the danger that still lurked. What if David discovered she was gone? What if Monica realized their plan had failed? Fear clawed at Sophia's heart, even as relief coursed through her veins. Finally, they reached the back exit. The cool night air hit her face, shocking her lungs back to life. She gasped, clutching her belly as her baby stirred inside her. The man set her down gently against a wall, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. "You need to get far away from here," he said firmly. "They won't stop until you're out of their reach." Sophia's voice cracked as she asked, "Why? Why would you help me? Who sent you?" The man hesitated, his gaze darkening. For a moment, it seemed he carried secrets too heavy to reveal. Then he simply said, "Let's just say I couldn't watch an innocent woman and her child buried alive." Sophia's heart raced. Questions swirled in her mind, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She leaned against the wall, tears streaming freely. She was alive, but barely. And though this mysterious rescuer had saved her tonight, she knew the nightmare was far from over. Because somewhere nearby, David and Monica still believed their plan had succeeded. And soon, they would learn their greatest mistake was leaving Sophia alive. The night wind carried Sophia away from the coffin, but it could not free her from the crushing weight inside her chest. Her rescuer had left her in the care of a discreet nurse in a small clinic far from the city. For hours she drifted in and out of consciousness, her body weak, her mind tangled in fragments of horror. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was quiet, except for the ticking of an old clock. The faint smell of disinfectant filled her nose. A nurse hovered at her bedside, her face etched with concern. Sophia tried to sit up, but a sharp pain cut through her stomach. She gasped, clutching at her belly instinctively. The nurse placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't move too quickly. You've been through a terrible shock." Sophia's voice cracked as the words tumbled out. "My baby? Is my baby okay?" The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The nurse's eyes lowered and her lips pressed into a thin line. Sophia's heart dropped. "No," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, please don't say it." The nurse's voice was soft, trembling with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. The trauma, the lack of oxygen, the baby couldn't survive." The world shattered. A sound tore from Sophia's throat, half scream, half sob, as she collapsed back onto the bed. Her arms wrapped around her stomach, as if trying to hold on to the life that had already slipped away. She shook violently, her tears soaking the thin hospital sheets. Her baby, the tiny heartbeat she had cherished, the little kicks that had kept her company in her loneliest nights, the future she had clung to when David's love began to fade. It was gone, all gone. She wept until her voice gave out, until her body trembled with exhaustion. The nurse stayed beside her, offering tissues, water, comfort, but nothing could fill the hollow that had opened inside her. Every breath felt like a betrayal to the child she had lost. In the blur of grief, Sophia's mind replayed the nightmare. David's cold eyes, Monica's smirk, the suffocating coffin, the baby's last desperate kicks inside her womb. The truth struck her like lightning. They had not only tried to kill her, they had killed her child. Her grief twisted into something darker. Anger, hatred, a burning fire that pushed through her chest and seared her tears dry. David had taken everything from her, her trust, her safety, her love, and now her child. Monica had smiled while plotting her death, stripping away the very future she lived for. Lying in that hospital bed, Sophia felt herself break in two. The old Sophia, the quiet, patient woman who endured in silence, died with her baby that night. What rose from the ashes was someone new, someone harder, someone who would never again allow herself to be powerless. And as her tears dried on her pillow, Sophia made a silent vow. David and Monica would pay, no matter how long it took. The days after the clinic felt like walking through a graveyard of broken dreams. Sophia wandered the streets with no destination, her body weak, her spirit fractured. The world around her carried on as if nothing had changed. Children laughed in playgrounds, couples strolled hand in hand. But to Sophia, everything looked gray, hollow, meaningless. She wrapped her coat tightly around her thin frame, though the cold she felt came not from the autumn air, but from the emptiness inside her. She had no child to hold, no husband to lean on, no future that made sense. All she carried was grief heavy enough to crush her soul. With trembling steps, she finally decided to go back to the one place she thought might still offer her shelter. David's family home. Perhaps his parents, her in-laws, would take pity on her. They had always smiled at her politely, had always spoken kindly enough, though never with warmth. But she told herself that surely, after everything, they would open their doors. She was their son's wife. She had just lost their grandchild. Surely they wouldn't turn her away. She arrived at the grand house, its tall gates gleaming under the afternoon sun. Taking a shaky breath, she rang the bell. Moments later, the heavy door opened, and David's mother stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes cold. "Sophia," the woman said flatly, not even pretending to be surprised. "You're supposed to be gone." The words sliced through Sophia like a knife. She staggered, her lips trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I have nowhere else to go. I lost the baby, I just need a place to stay." But David's mother's face hardened further. "You bring shame with you. Do you think I don't know what happened? Do you think we want the scandal of your pitiful tragedies staining this family's name? My son has moved on. You should too." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Moved on? He tried to kill me. He and Monica." "Enough," the woman snapped, her voice like a whip. "Whatever happened between you and David is none of our concern. You were never truly one of us. Now leave before I call security." The door slammed in her face. Sophia stood frozen, her body shaking, her tears streaming uncontrollably. The rejection cut deeper than any coffin lid, deeper than any betrayal. She wasn't just abandoned by David, she was erased by the very family she thought she had joined. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold stone steps, sobbing into her hands. People passing by glanced at her, some with pity, others with indifference. But no one stopped. No one reached out a hand. She was invisible to the world, discarded like trash. For hours she sat there, numb, her tears eventually drying into silent emptiness. When she finally stood, the sun had set and the street lights flickered on. She turned away from the house that had once symbolized security and walked into the darkness, utterly alone. But deep inside that loneliness, a seed of something new began to stir, rage waiting to rise. Sophia's body moved through the city like a shadow. She wandered with no clear direction, the soles of her shoes worn thin from days of walking aimlessly. She hadn't eaten properly in what felt like forever. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes swollen from endless tears. She carried nothing but a small bag and the unbearable weight of betrayal. That evening, rain began to fall, cold and relentless, soaking her coat within minutes. She found herself near a busy business district where glass towers touched the clouds. Men and women in suits hurried past, their umbrellas shielding them from the storm. Sophia had no umbrella. She pressed herself against a wall, shivering, feeling more invisible than ever. Her knees finally gave out. She sank to the pavement, curling into herself as raindrops beat down on her face. For a moment, she almost wished the storm would wash her away completely. That was when a black car slowed beside her. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His presence was commanding, even in the chaos of the rain. He wore a dark suit, though drops of water clung to his shoulders. His sharp eyes scanned the pitiful figure on the ground. "Sophia." "Miss," his voice was deep, steady, carrying authority. "Are you all right?" Sophia tried to answer, but her throat was too dry, her lips trembling. She managed only a whisper. "Please, don't leave me here." Without hesitation, the man bent down, sliding his arm beneath her fragile frame and lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She felt the warmth of his embrace against the cold rain, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely abandoned. He carried her into the car. The interior smelled of leather and faint cologne, warm compared to the storm outside. The driver glanced back but said nothing, as if used to his employer's unexpected decisions. The man pulled a blanket from the seat and wrapped it around her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sophia," she murmured, her eyes avoiding his. He studied her for a moment, noticing the bruises of exhaustion on her face, the despair in her eyes. Something about her struck him, not just her fragile state, but the quiet strength buried beneath her brokenness. "My name is James," he finally said. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." James, she had heard that name before. A CEO known in the city for his wealth, his power, his ruthless reputation in business. Yet in that moment, he didn't look ruthless. He looked human. Concern flickered in his eyes, a kind of empathy she hadn't seen in anyone for so long. Sophia leaned back against the seat, clutching the blanket tighter. For the first time since the coffin, she felt a sliver of safety. Still, doubt lingered in her chest. Why would a powerful man like him bother with someone like her? But fate had its ways. This meeting was no accident, because James carried scars of betrayal too, and soon, Sophia would learn he was the ally she never knew she needed. The warmth of the car and the steady hum of the engine gave Sophia a strange sense of calm. Wrapped in the blanket, she glanced sideways at James. He sat upright, his gaze fixed on the rain-smeared window. There was something about him. Strength, discipline, but also a heaviness in his eyes that mirrored her own. After a long silence, James spoke, his voice low. "You don't need to tell me what happened to you. Not yet. But I want you to know, I understand more than you think. Sophia frowned faintly, unsure what he meant. James leaned back, his jaw tightening as if he were pulling memories from a place he rarely allowed himself to visit. 5 years ago, he began, I thought I had everything, a wife who smiled at me every morning, a company I had built with my own hands, a future that seemed untouchable. He paused, his hands clasping together. But what I didn't see was the betrayal growing right under my roof. Sophia's breath caught. The word betrayal felt like a dagger because it was the very wound still bleeding inside her. James continued, his eyes dark. My wife, she wasn't content with loyalty. She found comfort in another man. My business partner, someone I trusted like a brother. Together, they conspired against me. While she warmed his bed, he stole from my company, nearly driving it into ruin. Sophia's eyes widened. The story was too close, too raw. James didn't just know betrayal, he had lived it. When I found out, he said, his voice growing colder, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost half of my employees, half of my reputation, nearly everything I worked for. But the worst part wasn't the money or the scandal. It was the look in her eyes when I confronted her. No guilt, no shame, just disdain, as if I was the fool for believing in her. The weight of his words hung heavy in the car. Sophia felt her chest tighten, her own memories flashing, David's coldness, Monica's smirk, the coffin. Their stories were different, but the wound was the same. Love turned into poison. James turned to her then, his eyes meeting hers. You see, Sophia, betrayal doesn't just break you once. It follows you, day after day, until you decide to fight back. That's the only way to silence it. For a moment, Sophia couldn't speak. She wanted to cry, not just for herself, but for him. This powerful man, feared in boardrooms, had known the same helplessness, the same knife in the back. And yet, here he was, still standing. A spark flickered inside her chest. If he could survive, maybe, just maybe, so could she. James's voice softened. I don't know your story yet, but I can see it in your eyes. Someone tried to destroy you, but you're still here. And as long as you're breathing, you are not finished. Sophia's tears slid silently down her cheeks. She had thought she was utterly alone in her suffering. But now, sitting beside James, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Understanding. And in that shared pain, the foundation of an unexpected alliance was born. The following weeks became a blur of quiet healing. James had taken Sophia into one of his private estates, a secluded house on the outskirts of the city, far from the glittering towers where David and Monica flaunted their stolen happiness. The place was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and open skies, a sanctuary she never expected to find. At first, Sophia resisted comfort. She was still broken, still haunted by the coffin, the loss of her child, the rejection from David's family. Nights were the hardest. She would wake up drenched in sweat, her hands clutching her stomach, her ears ringing with phantom cries that would never come. Each time, James was there. He never asked questions, never pressed her to speak before she was ready. Instead, he sat nearby, silent, his steady presence a reminder that she was no longer alone. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, James placed a cup of tea in front of her. His voice was calm but firm. You can't live in shadows forever, Sophia. You've been through hell, but you're still here. That means something. You survived for a reason. Sophia stared at him, her eyes tired. A reason? I lost everything. My child, my marriage, my place in this world. What reason could there be? James leaned closer, his gaze unflinching. The reason is simple. You're not finished yet. The people who tried to bury you think they've won, but you're alive. That makes you dangerous to them. The only question is, will you stay broken or will you rise? His words struck something deep within her. For weeks, she had seen herself only as a victim, a woman discarded and forgotten. But the fire of anger she had felt in the hospital returned, faint but real. She clenched her hands, feeling the weight of his challenge. From that day on, James began guiding her. He wasn't gentle in the way one might expect. He pushed her, challenged her, demanded strength she didn't think she had. He had her read books on business, on leadership, on resilience. He brought her into his company's offices, at first quietly, letting her observe meetings from the shadows. Slowly, she began to understand the world David had always kept from her, the world of power, negotiation, and strategy. James also worked on her confidence. He arranged for her to meet stylists, not to transform her into someone fake, but to remind her of the woman she could be. When she stood before the mirror in elegant clothes for the first time, Sophia barely recognized herself. The timid wife who once cooked dinners alone was gone. In her place stood a woman with sharp eyes and a quiet strength. Every step was painful, every lesson heavy. But with each passing day, Sophia felt her broken pieces begin to realign. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing. And as James watched her transformation, he knew the day would come when Sophia would no longer hide. She would confront David and Monica face to face. While Sophia was quietly rebuilding herself under James's watch, David and Monica lived as if they had already won. To them, Sophia was nothing but a shadow of the past, buried in silence, erased from their future. Their world glittered with champagne toasts, shopping sprees, and whispered promises of a life without limits. Monica had moved into David's penthouse, her clothes scattered across the walk-in closet where Sophia's belongings had once been. She paraded in silk gowns, diamonds glinting at her throat, her laughter echoing against the marble walls. Every corner of the home that Sophia had once dreamed of sharing with her husband now smelled of Monica's perfume. David indulged her every whim, lavish dinners at the city's most exclusive restaurants, vacations abroad where cameras couldn't follow. He boasted about his freedom, about how light his life felt now that the burden was gone. He never mentioned Sophia's name, not once, as if by erasing her existence from his lips he could erase her from memory. One evening, as they dined on a rooftop under the glow of city lights, Monica leaned across the table, her red lips curling into a satisfied smile. "It's over, David. She's gone. We don't ever have to look back." David raised his glass, his expression smug. "To us. To the life we deserve." They clinked glasses, drinking to their cruelty. But behind Monica's glimmering eyes lay more than satisfaction. She wanted control. She wanted more than David's affection. She wanted his empire. Slowly, she began weaving herself deeper into his business dealings, offering suggestions, whispering strategies. He mistook her ambition for devotion, never realizing she saw him as a stepping stone, just as she once saw Sophia as an obstacle. At the same time, gossip spread quietly in their social circles. Whispers of Sophia's tragic death, though no official details were ever made public. Some questioned the sudden disappearance, but David brushed it off with charm, telling half-truths about illness, about complications in pregnancy. His lies slid easily from his tongue, convincing enough to silence curiosity. Monica played the grieving act perfectly when needed, dabbing her eyes at the right moments, painting herself as the supportive partner who had helped David through loss. Together, they built an illusion so convincing that even their closest acquaintances believed it. Their cruelty was hidden beneath luxury, their crime dressed in gold. They walked hand in hand through galas, smiled for photographs, and accepted congratulations on their new chapter. But beneath their triumph, cracks were already forming. Monica's hunger for more grew insatiable, and David's arrogance blinded him to the danger in trusting her completely. They believed they had destroyed Sophia. They believed she was nothing more than a ghost they had buried. What they didn't know was that ghosts sometimes return, not to haunt, but to destroy. And while David and Monica celebrated their false victory, Sophia was preparing to step back into their world, stronger than ever, ready to turn their illusion into ashes. The night of Sophia's return was not chosen by chance. James had been preparing her for weeks, guiding her through lessons in composure, in business, in the art of commanding a room without speaking a word. She had shed the timid woman who once wept alone in an empty apartment. Now, every step she took carried purpose. The occasion was a gala, one of the city's most prestigious events, a gathering of CEOs, investors, and socialites. It was also an event David was set to attend, parading Monica on his arm like the trophy he believed she was. The perfect stage for Sophia's reappearance. She arrived in a sleek black car, the kind that announced power before the door even opened. When she stepped out, the crowd turned. Gone was the fragile woman with swollen eyes and trembling hands. In her place stood a vision of strength. Sophia wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue, its elegance understated yet commanding. Her hair cascaded in waves, her makeup highlighting sharp cheekbones and eyes that now carried steel instead of sorrow. For a moment, the crowd did not recognize her. Then whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Sophia? I thought she was gone. Impossible. She looks different." Cameras clicked, flashes lit the night, and every whisper only fed her silent power. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered above tables dressed in gold. David laughed loudly at one corner, Monica clinging to his arm in a gown that sparkled with sequins. They basked in the attention, unaware of the storm about to hit. Then the music shifted as Sophia entered. Heads turned, conversations halted. Even the servers carrying champagne slowed to stare. She walked with steady grace, each step echoing louder than the orchestra. David froze when he saw her. The color drained from his face, his smug grin collapsing into shock. Monica's eyes widened, her hand tightening on David's arm like a vice. For the first time in their charmed lives, they looked like prey. Sophia did not rush toward them. She didn't need to. She let the silence speak, let their panic betray them in front of everyone. She greeted a few influential guests along the way, her voice calm, her smile soft but unshakable. Each gesture reminded David and Monica that she was no ghost. She was flesh, blood, and stronger than ever. When she finally stood across from them, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes locked on David's. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. "I survived. And you should be afraid." Monica forced a brittle laugh, whispering something into David's ear, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. David's hands twitched, his confident facade cracking. Sophia turned away gracefully, leaving them to drown in their terror. She didn't need a scene. Not yet. Tonight was not about revenge. Tonight was about revelation. The city had seen her alive, stronger, radiant. The illusion David and Monica had built was collapsing in real time. And as Sophia disappeared into the crowd, David realized his biggest mistake. He hadn't buried his wife. He had awakened his worst enemy. The gala had ended, but David couldn't shake the image of Sophia walking into the ballroom alive, glowing, and untouchable. All night, he felt eyes on him, some curious, some suspicious. The whispers followed him like shadows. Didn't his wife die? How is she here? What is going on? His empire of lies had cracked, and panic gnawed at his chest. Unable to bear the tension, he slipped away from Monica and stormed into the quiet hallway behind the ballroom. His fists clenched, his breath ragged. That was when he heard the click of heels echoing in the silence. Slow, measured, purposeful. Sophia stepped out from the shadows. For a moment, David's breath caught in his throat. She looked even more terrifying up close, not because she was angry or hysterical, but because she was calm. Too calm. Her eyes no longer pleaded for love or begged for answers. They burned with quiet steel, sharp enough to cut him without a single word. "Hello, David," she said softly, her tone steady. "Surprised to see me?" His jaw tightened. How are you here? You were..." He cut himself off, realizing his own words betrayed him. "Dead?" Sophia finished for him, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "That was the plan, wasn't it?" David stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be here. You..." "Stop lying," she interrupted, her voice firm. "You and Monica tried to bury me alive. You thought I wouldn't survive, but I did. And now I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me, was it worth it? Was her love worth murdering your wife and your child?" Her words struck him like a blade. David's face twisted, torn between rage and fear. He tried to compose himself, to regain the charm that had fooled so many. "Sophia, you're confused. You were sick, delusional. Monica and I only wanted what was best." She laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the hall. "Best for who? For you? For her? While I suffocated in a coffin, you toasted to your new life. While I lost our baby, you handed her diamonds." David's mask cracked completely. His eyes flickered with panic. "If you say any of this publicly, no one will believe you. It's your word against mine." Sophia stepped closer until she was only inches from him. He could see the fire in her eyes, the strength he thought he had crushed. "You're wrong. People will believe me, and when they do, they'll see you for what you are. A coward, a liar, and a murderer." For the first time, David felt powerless. The woman he had buried was standing before him, fearless, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. He couldn't intimidate her anymore. He couldn't silence her. Sophia leaned in, her whisper colder than ice. "You tried to bury me, David, but you forgot. I am not dirt, I am fire, and I'm coming for everything you thought you stole." David froze, his heart pounding with a fear he had never known, because for the first time he realized Sophia wasn't his victim anymore. She was his reckoning. After the confrontation, Sophia knew words alone would never be enough. David was powerful, connected, and skilled at twisting the truth. If she wanted to destroy him and Monica, she would need more than anger. She would need proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that would expose their crimes and leave them with nowhere to hide. That night, in the safety of James's estate, she told him everything. For the first time, she spoke every detail. The coffin, the suffocation, the baby she lost, the rejection from David's family. Her voice broke, but her determination never wavered. James listened in silence, his expression darkening with every word. When she finally finished, he leaned forward, his tone steady and resolute. "Then we'll gather what we need. Evidence is power, and once you have it, they won't be able to breathe without the world knowing what they did." With James's resources, the plan began. He assigned a team of discreet investigators, people loyal only to him, to dig into David and Monica's every move. Private accounts, hidden meetings, financial records, nothing was off limits. Weeks turned into a tense rhythm of waiting and discovery. Sophia accompanied James to his office, where she watched evidence slowly pile up like bricks, building a fortress. Secret photographs showed David and Monica meeting in dimly lit hotels long before Sophia's supposed death. Bank transfers revealed money David had siphoned from his company into hidden accounts, funds used to finance Monica's extravagant lifestyle. And then came the most damning piece. A security camera recording from the funeral parlor, capturing David's figure hovering over the coffin, his hand pressing against the lid. Sophia's stomach turned when she saw it, her nails digging into the armrest of the chair. Proof, undeniable proof that he had tried to bury her alive. James placed a steady hand over hers. "This is enough to ruin him. But if you want, we can gather more. We can expose not just what he did to you, but every crime he's ever hidden." Sophia nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "I don't just want him ruined, James. I want the world to see him the way I saw him in that coffin. Cold, heartless, and unforgivable." So they pressed further. James's team uncovered Monica's role in the conspiracy, text messages laced with venom, her own handwriting in notes that outlined the plan to stage Sophia's death. The more Sophia read, the more she realized Monica had not only manipulated David, but relished every detail of her suffering. One evening, as Sophia held the thick file of evidence in her hands, she felt a strange mixture of pain and power. These pages represented her darkest nightmares, but they were also her weapon, her shield, her voice. James studied her with quiet respect. "When you're ready, we'll strike. But know this, Sophia, once we unleash this, there's no going back." Sophia looked up, her voice firm. "Good. I don't want to go back. I want justice." And with every document, every photo, every recording, Sophia's revenge took shape, not as a dream, but as a storm that would soon crash down on David and Monica. The night of the gala arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. It was the city's most prestigious charity event, a gathering where every powerful figure, politicians, CEOs, socialites, paraded their wealth and influence. Cameras flashed at the entrance, reporters clamored for interviews, and whispers of alliances floated through the grand ballroom. Sophia had been preparing for this moment for weeks. With James by her side, she stepped out of the car, and the world seemed to stop. Her gown shimmered under the lights, her posture unshakable, her eyes cold yet radiant. She looked like royalty, untouchable, and for the first time in her life, she felt the power of commanding a room, not by pleading, but by owning it. James walked beside her, his hand resting lightly at her back, a silent show of support. Their arrival sent ripples of shock through the crowd. Whispers erupted instantly. "Isn't that Sophia? But I thought she was dead. What's she doing here with James of all people?" Across the room, David nearly dropped his glass when he saw her. Monica's nails dug into his arm, her smile faltering as panic flickered across her face. They hadn't just lost control, they had lost their carefully built illusion. The master of ceremonies welcomed the guests, the chandeliers casting golden light over the hall. Music swelled, laughter echoed, and conversations buzzed. But underneath it all, tension thickened like smoke. Sophia could feel David's eyes burning into her, could almost taste his fear. When the time came for speeches, James was invited to the stage, He was a respected name, admired for his wealth and philanthropy, so no one questioned his presence. But what no one expected was what he carried with him. Truth wrapped in iron. "Tonight," James began, his voice smooth yet commanding, "we celebrate generosity and honor. But generosity means nothing if we turn a blind eye to injustice." The crowd hushed. His words were not the usual flattering speech. He gestured toward Sophia, who now stood in the spotlight, calm and unyielding. "Many of you know this woman, or rather you think you do. You heard rumors, lies, that she was gone, but the truth is far darker." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. With a steady hand, she held up the file of evidence James's team had gathered. The screen behind them lit up with images, documents, messages, each one a dagger of truth. Photographs of David and Monica together. Bank transfers. The damning footage from the funeral parlor. Each revelation hit like thunder, and the crowd erupted in disbelief, outrage, and whispers of betrayal. David lunged forward, his face twisted in desperation. "She's lying. This is all fabricated." But his words fell flat against the flood of evidence flashing across the screen. Monica's face drained of color, her carefully constructed mask shattering in front of everyone. Sophia's voice finally cut through the chaos, calm, sharp, unforgiving. "You tried to bury me. You stole my child. You thought I would disappear. But tonight, the world sees you for what you really are." And as the room erupted, David realized there was no coffin deep enough to bury the truth Sophia had unleashed. Chaos swept through the ballroom like wildfire. Guests rose from their seats, voices clashing in disbelief. Phones were pulled out, recording every second of David and Monica's humiliation. The screen behind Sophia continued to display damning evidence. Bank records, text messages, the chilling footage of David pressing the coffin lid. The truth was undeniable. David's face turned crimson as he shouted above the noise. "This is a setup. She's lying. She's trying to ruin me because she couldn't handle our marriage ending." But no one believed him. The evidence spoke louder than his trembling voice. A senator's wife gasped from her table. "I knew something was off about him." Another guest whispered, "Imagine burying your own pregnant wife. He's a monster." Monica's mask of elegance shattered completely. She clutched David's arm, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "Say something. Fix this." But David had no fix. The cameras flashed, capturing his every stammer, his every bead of sweat. He looked smaller than ever, his carefully polished image disintegrating in front of the very people whose approval he craved. Sophia didn't flinch. She stood in the center of it all, her presence unshakable, her silence more powerful than their screams. When she finally spoke, her words cut through the chaos like a blade. "You tried to erase me. You stole my child. You thought no one would ever hear the truth. But tonight, everyone has." The room erupted again, this time with gasps and murmurs of sympathy directed at her. In an instant, she transformed from the forgotten wife into the wronged woman who had clawed her way back from the grave. Public opinion shifted like a tide, and it crashed hard against David and Monica. Security moved in, alerted by James's silent nod. They weren't there to remove Sophia. They were there to shield her as the storm closed in on her enemies. Reporters outside had already caught wind of the scandal. By morning, headlines would plaster David's name across every newspaper and screen. "Businessman exposed in wife's near-death plot." Desperate, David turned on Monica. "This is your fault. You pushed me into this." Monica recoiled, her eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare put this on me. You agreed to everything. You were weak. You're the one who ruined it." Their alliance collapsed in real time, venom spilling from their lips as they blamed each other. Guests watched in horror, some shaking their heads, others recording gleefully. The glamorous couple who once dazzled society now tore each other apart like rabid animals. Sophia stepped closer, her eyes cold. "You deserve each other, and you'll destroy each other. But first, you'll answer for what you did to me." David lunged forward as if to silence her. But two security guards restrained him. Monica shrieked, her voice cracking, her eyes darting wildly as she realized there was no escape. Their empire, their illusion, their carefully crafted lies, it all crumbled in one night. And as the crowd's judgment rained down on them, David and Monica weren't just disgraced. They were finished. By the morning after the gala, David's empire was in ruins. The news spread faster than fire, every headline screaming his name in disgrace. Businessman plots to bury pregnant wife alive. David Marshall and Mistress Monica exposed in shocking scandal. The media feasted on every detail, replaying the damning footage again and again. His face was everywhere, not as a respected figure, but as a monster. His company's board wasted no time. In an emergency meeting, shareholders stripped him of his position. Clients withdrew contracts, terrified of being linked to his name. Banks froze his accounts pending investigation. Overnight, the man who once boasted about power and wealth became a pariah. His phone buzzed endlessly, but it wasn't loyalty calling. It was lawyers, debt collectors, and enemies circling like vultures. David sat in his penthouse, surrounded by shattered glass from the vase he had hurled at the wall. His once pristine home was a wreck, just like him. Monica paced the room, her nerves unraveling with each passing hour. "You promised me everything," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You said we'd be untouchable." David glared at her, his eyes bloodshot. "You pushed me into this. You wanted her gone. You wanted it all." Monica's laugh was hollow, bitter. "And you were stupid enough to listen. Do you think I would have ever risked my life for you? I used you, David. You were never more than a means to an end." The words sliced through what little pride he had left. For the first time, David saw Monica for what she truly was, a predator who devoured without remorse. His anger boiled, but before he could lash out, Monica grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. "I'm not sinking with you," she hissed. "You're finished, and I won't be dragged down by a failure." The slam of the door echoed through the hollow apartment, leaving David alone in silence. He had lost his company, his fortune, his lover. The city outside buzzed with whispers of his downfall, but inside, he was nothing more than a broken man, pacing through the ruins of his arrogance. Monica, meanwhile, found no salvation in leaving him. Her name was already tied to the scandal. Reporters hounded her every step, cameras flashing as they called her the mistress who plotted murder. Once invited to the most exclusive parties, she was now shut out, doors slammed in her face. The diamonds she flaunted were suddenly worthless, symbols of her greed and betrayal. In desperation, she reached out to old friends, but none answered. She was toxic, abandoned by the very circle she once manipulated. Alone in a hotel room stripped of glamour, Monica stared at her reflection. Smudged makeup, hollow eyes, a woman who had climbed by stepping on others, only to fall harder than she ever imagined. David lost everything he built. Monica lost the illusion she lived for. Together they were nothing but ashes of a fire they had lit themselves. And while they drowned in disgrace, Sophia stood tall, finally free of their shadows, ready to claim her new life. The storm had passed. David and Monica had destroyed themselves, consumed by their own greed and betrayal. Their downfall was splashed across every newspaper, their names cursed in every social circle. For Sophia, it was the justice she had once thought impossible. But justice alone was not enough. She needed healing. She needed to learn how to live again. James stayed by her side through it all. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. Instead, he offered her the two things she had been denied for so long: safety and respect. Slowly, Sophia began to breathe again without fear, to laugh without guilt, to see the world not as a place of shadows but of possibility. One afternoon, months after the gala, Sophia stood on the balcony of James's estate, the sun warming her face. Below her stretched gardens filled with color, life blooming in every direction. She closed her eyes and felt the breeze against her skin, a gentle reminder that she was alive, not just surviving but living. James joined her, placing a cup of tea in her hands. "You look different," he said softly. Sophia smiled faintly. "Different how?" "Stronger," he replied, "like someone who knows her worth." His words touched something deep within her. She had once believed her worth was tied to being a wife, to sacrificing for someone who didn't value her. But now she knew better. Her worth was in her resilience, in her ability to rise from the ashes of betrayal and stand taller than ever. Over time, her bond with James grew into something neither of them had expected. They were not two broken people clinging to each other. They were survivors, equals, building something new out of respect and trust. James never tried to erase her scars. He honored them, just as she honored his. Together they found not just companionship, but love. When Sophia finally agreed to marry him, it wasn't out of desperation or need. It was a choice. A choice to embrace a man who saw her as his equal, not his possession. Their wedding was small, intimate, surrounded by only those who truly cared for them. No pretense, no lies, just a celebration of survival and new beginnings. As she walked down the aisle, Sophia carried with her the memory of the child she had lost, the pain that had once defined her. But instead of breaking her, it gave her strength. She vowed never to forget, never to let her story be buried like she once almost was. Her life was a testament that even in the face of betrayal and loss, a woman could rise, rebuild, and reclaim everything stolen from her. That night, standing with James under the stars, Sophia whispered a promise to herself: "I will never be silenced again." And as her laughter echoed across the gardens, Sophia's story closed not in tragedy, but in triumph. A reminder to every woman watching that no betrayal, no cruelty, no coffin could bury the strength of a woman who chooses to rise. So, my dear friends, the story has now come to a close. And if you're still here, listening all the way to this very moment, then I believe something in Sophia's journey has touched your heart. Maybe it's her pain, maybe it's her courage, or maybe it's the reminder that no matter how dark life feels, we are never truly finished until we decide to give up. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Sophia chose to rise, and so can we. Betrayal, loss, heartbreak, they don't define us. What defines us is the strength we gather afterward. So if this story moved you, let's carry its message into our lives. Never let cruelty bury your spirit. If you believe in resilience, in justice, in healing, then please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we rise.